Good morning, everyone. This is Pastor Larry, and I would like to share a little video about my experience this past weekend with my Jesus and a brisket. And what took place was our Minister Alliance, about a month or so ago, we had gotten together and come up with a date to do a community hymn sing. And we normally, when we have our community hymn sings, we have the singing part of the evening, and then we all gather together and have a meal, share a meal together. And for the meal, myself and Pastor Alan Harris of the Julesburg Christian Church and Pastor Mark Baker of the Harvest Baptist Church, we normally cook the meat. And we have a little bit of competition in who can cook this piece of meat better. And then it is judged that evening, and we get a little bit of bragging rights. Anyway, one of the three of us, I don't remember which, but somebody had the bright idea, let us do brisket. Well, Larry has never cooked a brisket, but I love to barbecue and use my grills and my smoker. So I said, okay. And so I was getting a little excited because I was going to have an opportunity to try and do something that I hadn't done before, but also at the same time, I was a little apprehensive, a little worried that this brisket would not turn out very well. And so I run down to the Blue store last week and look at briskets, and when I get there, they only have one brisket. That's it. And it was a lot bigger brisket, 14 pounds, which is a lot bigger than what I wanted to cook. But that's all they had, so I put it in the cart. And Friday evening, I had did some investigating on how to cook these things. And so I trimmed all the fat that people said to trim off and do all these things, put my seasoning on it, wrapped it up, put it in the refrigerator. And then Saturday came, and I was planning on starting that brisket Saturday evening and letting it cook all through the night because it was going to take roughly about 15 hours. And just as I was getting everything ready, the wind picked up. And I don't watch the weather a whole lot, which ain't very smart. But anyway, I told my wife, I said, that wind's really picked up. She goes, yeah, we're under a wind advisory. 45 mile an hour sustained winds gusting up to 70 miles an hour. I said, well, how am I going to smoke this brisket with the wind blowing like that outside? She says, I don't know what to tell you. So then I thought, well, there's got to be another way to cook it. And so I got to checking, and you could put it in a roaster. And then I thought about doing that, and then I thought, well, if Pastor Allen and Pastor Mark find out that I let a little wind stop me from smoking this brisket and using a roaster pan to cook it, they would probably take my man card. So I told my wife, I said, I got an idea. I'm going to just leave the smoker in the garage. I'll crack the door and open up the window on the walk-through door, and hopefully the smoke will vent out and it won't fill our house up. Well, I put the brisket in there and we got started, and the smoke wasn't too bad. And everything seemed to be going good. The smoker was running good, and had my meat probes in there, and the temperature was rising. Everything seemed to be going real well. And then all of a sudden, after a couple hours of cooking it, I got to noticing the internal temperature of this brisket wasn't going up any farther. Man, something's wrong. So I even pulled the probes out and stuck them back in, like somehow they went bad inside the brisket. And still, the temperature just wasn't rising. And so I jumped on Google and I learned something. There is a thing called a brisket pause. Never heard of it before. But a brisket pause is when the brisket gets to a certain temperature, it just stops. And it's not that it doesn't continue to cook. The temperature just doesn't go up very quickly. And this brisket pause can last like 2-3 hours. And I'm sitting there worried like an old wet hen that this thing ain't cooking. I took my little digital instant thermometer out there and stuck it in that brisket, and it wasn't going up either. And I was worried to death. And then after about 3 hours, I noticed the temperature started to go up. And I'm like, whew. You know, I thought for sure I was done. And so after about, I don't know, 10 hours, the brisket got up to the right temperature. I wrapped it all up like the recipe told me to. Put it back in there, and about 5 o'clock in the morning, I had cut my brisket in half because it was so large. One half was done. So I took it out and I wrapped it up in a towel just like they say to do to let it rest. And then I had to get ready for church. I have church, my first service is in Sedgwick, and it's at 9 o'clock. And the other half of the brisket still wasn't done yet. And so I told my wife, I said, baby, you're going to have to take that brisket out when it reaches 190 degrees. And you got to wrap it this way in the butcher paper, and then you got to wrap it in a towel, and please don't mess up. I showed very little faith in my wife at that moment. Anyway, I take off for church, and we have a good service in Sedgwick. I get back down here to Julesburg for our service here, and the first thing I asked her, did you get the brisket out in time? Yep. Did you wrap it? Yep. She goes, I think it's going to be fine. I said, okay. And all through the service, I'm worried to death about those briskets. And so about noon, we get home and I unwrap them. And man, not to toot my horn, but those things looked beautiful. They looked delicious. And I couldn't hardly wait to carve them up and start eating, but it was still a little too early yet. Now, as I was sitting there feeling pretty proud of myself, my Jesus showed up. He says, let's have a talk. I said, okay, Lord. He says, what does that brisket remind you of? And I'm like, well, I have no idea what you're talking about. He says, think about it a little bit. What can that brisket represent? And I said, well, it could represent my lack of faith when I was cooking it. It could represent me not putting my trust in you when I was cooking it. There's a lot of mistakes I made spiritually while I was cooking this brisket. And he says, no. He says, do you remember David Ring? Now, David Ring is an evangelist, and he's been an evangelist since the 70s. And I remember watching a special on television, a gospel special, where a bunch of pretty well-known Southern gospel singers had gotten together and were having a singing. And they invited David. And the thing about David Ring is he has cerebral palsy. It's very difficult for him to talk. And he can't even button his own shirt. He can't tie his own shoes. But yet God had blessed him and made him a very, very good evangelist. And they were getting ready to sing the song, There's Coming a Day. Oh, beautiful song. And David was talking, and he says, he says, ever since I was little, I was different. And some people accepted me being different, but many did not. He says, but I want to tell you something. He said, I can't button my shirt, and I can't tie my own shoes, and it may be difficult for you to understand me speaking, but there's coming a day. There's coming a day that I'll be able to button my own shirt, tie my own shoes, and you will be able to hear me clearly. So he goes on to say, so if you don't like how I am right now, just hold on a minute. He says, because my Jesus is still in the kitchen, and he's not done cooking on me yet. And then it dawned on me what Jesus was trying to tell me. I was worrying about nothing You see, that brisket, if I look at it the right way, represents me. It was just a piece of meat. And when Jesus was forming me, I was just meat, bones, tissue. And the thing that struck me the most about what David Ring had said was Jesus is still in the kitchen. And he's still cooking on me. And then he went on to say, he said, and then there's coming a day when Jesus will take me out of the oven and look at me and say, well done, my good and faithful servant. I like the well done part. And David will be perfect. And as I'm sitting there thinking about this, the Lord spoke to my heart and he says, it doesn't matter what people think about how you look, how you talk, how you function. You function and you look and you speak exactly how Christ created you, how God created you. But there's coming a day, my friend, not everybody's going to like how you are today. They can nitpick. I took a piece of that brisket that I had cooked over to my brother, and he tried it, him and his wife was telling me how good it tasted, and he says, yeah, it's pretty moist, but it's lacking flavor. And I'm like, really? But you see, I love my brother to death, and he was pulling my leg. But the world looks for our flaws. And when they like to bring out our flaws, and let's be honest, sometimes Christians like to look for our flaws as well, amen? They sure do. But when they point out our flaws, let us just be reminded and let them know, hey, my Jesus ain't done yet. He's still in the kitchen. And he's still cooking on me, but there's coming a day that I will be perfect as Christ is perfect. That is what we have to live for. That is what we have to look forward to. We don't focus so much on today and what we may be today, but focus more on eternity and what we will be in eternity. When that day comes, and Jesus takes us out of that oven, and he unwraps us, and he looks at us, and he says, well done, my good and faithful servant. Because he is the creator. He formed us. In fact, the psalmist David wrote in Psalms 139, verse 13, he says, for you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Amen. We are fearfully and wonderfully made because Christ made us. And when he went to that cross for us and we accepted his gift of salvation, we became new creatures, and he continues to cook on us today. So friends, I hope this is an encouragement to you that don't look at your faults. Don't look at your flaws. The world will take care of that for you. Just remember that you are a child of God, and you may not be where you want to be today. And if you're not, just hold on. Because my Jesus is still in the kitchen. And he's still cooking on you, and he's still cooking on me. And that day will come when he takes us out of that oven and looks at us and says, well done. So friends, I hope this was encouraging to you. It's amazing when we think about the Lord, how he just appears and gives us such wisdom and such peace and joy. And so with that, I pray that you have a wonderful day. Again, I would also ask that you would share this video, that others may come to know our Jesus It's a wonderful tool to be able to reach the lost and those who may not be lost but are going through difficult times. So if you would, please share this video. And I pray that the Lord put somebody into your life today that you can share the truth of our Jesus. And so, friends, you have a wonderful and blessed day. And once again, thank you so much for allowing me to tell you about my Jesus.